جو ڈائنامکس ہیں جس سے ہندوستان یا اس خطے کو جو متاثر کر رہے ہیں، اس ڈائنامک کو سمجھنے کی ضرورت ہے، اور اس ضمن میں اکیڈیمکلی اس ڈیکوڈنگ کے ٹاپک کو میرے خیال میں دیکھنے کی بھی ضرورت ہے۔ آخر ڈیکوڈنگ سے مراد کیا ہے؟ کسی ملک کی فارن پالیسی یا کوئی بھی پالیسی کو سمجھنے کے لیے سب سے پہلے آپ کو اس ملک کی ذہن کا اندازہ لگانا پڑتا ہے۔ ہندوستان کے کیس میں ہر پاکستانی جانتا ہے کہ ہندوستانی اسٹیٹ کا ذہن کیسا ہے، اور بارہا اس ضمن میں انہوں نے اس کو ڈیمونسٹریٹ کر کے بھی اپنے کنڈکٹ سے دکھایا ہے۔ مگر اس کی وجہ کیا ہے؟ میرے خیال میں تاریخی پس منظر میں اگر دیکھا جائے تو ہندوستان ایکچولی ایک ملک نہیں ہے۔ ہم اس کو ایک اسٹیٹ کا درجہ دیتے ہیں، مگر یہ ایکچولی ایک اسٹیٹ نہیں ہے، یہ ایک پروڈکٹ ہے کلونیل آکیوپیشن، ایکسپلائٹیشن اور ڈیپریڈیشن کا، جو 100 سے زیادہ سال تک برطانوی سماج نے اس خطے میں کیا، اور جاتے ہوئے 1947 میں یہ کلونیل پروڈکٹ جو تھا وہ انڈین نیشنل کانگریس کو انہوں نے گفٹ کیا۔ تاریخی طور پر یہ خطہ جو ہے اس میں بہت سی پرنسپیلٹیز تھیں، فیفڈمز تھے، راجے مہاراجے تھے، ان کو بہت کم دفعہ کسی قوت نے یکجا کیا۔ ٹھیک ہے، مغل بھی رہے، اس سے پہلے لودھی بھی رہے، اور لوگ بھی رہے، کوشش سب نے کی کہ اس خطے پہ اپنا تسلط قائم کریں، بٹ آخری جو کوشش تھی وہ برطانوی سامراج نے کیا، اور اس کا جو پروڈکٹ تھا جس کو آج آپ کہتے ہیں انڈین اسٹیٹ، وہ اس کا سکسیسر یہ جس کو ہندوستان کے نام سے ہم جانتے ہیں وہ بنا۔ سو انڈیا آف ٹوڈے واز بیسکلی a colonial package of British imperialism. In every sense, India of today is a historical aberration. There are about 29 states within the Indian Union. Each has a different ethos, different races, different cultures, different languages. But when we from Pakistan or elsewhere in the world look at India, we look at Narendra Modi, we look at Delhi, the capital, and it does not occur to us that India is a sum total of a very diverse population. For instance, I have traveled to West Bengal. Manzoor Sahib was with me in that, and we were received by Mamata Banerjee. They had a different view of Pakistan. Similarly, in Bihar, Patna, which the Indians sort of fancied, the Mauryan dynasty, the capital of the Mauryan Empire. Nitish Kumar, the chief minister, had a very, very different view of Pakistan. So what I'm trying to say is there's great diversity. And I think in Pakistan, especially in the policy making circles, we need to look beyond Delhi, beyond the External Affairs Ministry, and beyond the office of the Indian Prime Minister. But if this is true, that India of today, of 1947, was packaged by colonial exploits, therefore it inherited that colonial mindset. To keep this package intact, it has but to continue with the sort of mindset that there has been. So, as Arundhati Roy recently said, the state of India has been at perpetual war. Hyderabad, Junagadh, Goa, Sikkim, Assam, Jammu and Kashmir, against the Mayas, the Naxalites and Sikhs, oppression, persecution of minorities, aggression against China and Pakistan, Bangladesh, interventions in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal and Bhutan. So this is a continuing thing. In fact, as you know, more than 1/3 of the Indian territory is under active insurgencies. Indian Union is fragile. I think this is a point that we need to understand. It is not that powerful. It has conducted itself in a manner, the domineering, the hegemonic, the militaristic aspects in the colonial mode, but the union itself is not robust, not strong, it's fragile. So to keep the notion of the union alive, the Indian leaders from the very beginning invented various labels, such as secular democracy. Now, Hindutva, Hindu Rashtra. I see this as desperate attempts to find the right mix, the cement, that will keep the colonial package that I referred to earlier intact. And as Aziz Khan Sahib said, myths and delusions are part of their stratagems. Now, foreign policy abroad for any state is the pursuit of national interests in the external domain, which need to be prioritized and need to have some rationality. But one thing which stands out in the case of India is that foreign policy has largely been a tool of domestic politics. It has always been, and especially for the Modi regime, it is a vote-getting exercise. That is what drives Indian foreign policy. This is one aspect. As I said earlier, if foreign policy is pursuit of national interests, what is India's national interests? India's national interest is not the welfare of the people or socio-economic advancement of the Indian people, but Indian national interests are defined in terms of what I call Hindu imperialism. A certain primitive tribalism informs the RSS thesis on Hindu revival. Xenophobia, Islamophobia, and narrow nationalism, in my view, will do India no good. It has already cost India its global reputation as a secular democracy, and at home, Modi's policies have led to political polarization and caused social convulsions. The Hindutva experiment is definitely taking India back to the dark ages. Indian economy is failing, and racial and religious strife is increasing exponentially. Fanciful notions of greatness also find a lot of references in India's strategic thinking. Let me briefly quote some reputed Indian strategists and diplomats. For instance, Jaswant Singh, who was the foreign minister one time, in his book Defending India states that India's present political borders do not conform to its strategic frontiers, which include Afghanistan and extend to Myanmar. That's the scope of the strategic objectives definition. And this is repeated even more recently. For instance, an interesting quote from Shyam Saran, who was the Foreign Secretary's book, How India Sees the World. He says, The driving impulse of India's strategic policy is the eventual integration of the Indian subcontinent. This will remain an enduring objective of India's foreign policy. Since independence, the persistent challenge for India is the reconciliation of its security interests, which cover the entire subcontinent, with the reality of a divided polity. And he goes on to say, there are only two ways. One is being powerful enough to impose India's security perspective on other countries in the subcontinent in the manner of Pax Indica, Indian peace. The other is by designing political, economic, cultural, and security policies to create a web of interdependencies. India could take advantage of its size, its asymmetrical strengths vis-a-vis its neighbors to achieve a level of interconnectedness that would render borders irrelevant. And finally, the punchline, Saran says, the idea of making the subcontinent whole again is a powerful driver of India's foreign policy behavior. One aspect which comes from this is the Indian obsession with Pakistan. And I think my colleagues, seniors who have served in Delhi, much more experienced, they will agree with me that each and every Indian is obsessed with Pakistan. It's remarkable. But that obsession is not benign. For them, undoing Pakistan is a key strategic objective. India, in its present form, will not reconcile to the existence of Pakistan. The question of peaceful coexistence as equals for us will always be a challenge. This is written in stone. No matter how much you try, roads, avenues of dialogue or whatever, they will not reconcile. In fact, people like Subramaniam Swamy, the one-man party leader which has only one member himself, he appears frequently. More recently also he said something that, we don't fear a two-front war. This will provide us an opportunity to break Pakistan into four. Now, these are people, these are popular opinions which find resonance in the Indian populace. And I believe India will also not let go of its stranglehold over Jammu and Kashmir. A peaceful solution of the Kashmir dispute is improbable. So although we may keep on asking for it, it is not going to happen. Again, indirectly, but coming from Subramaniam Jaishankar, the present External Affairs Minister, he has written a book which goes titled The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World. He says there are three big burdens that India carries, which has delayed its rise like China as a big power. The first, he mentions the 1947 partition, says, has reduced the nation demographically and politically. That's one thing that is the biggest obstacle, he says, and it has hindered India's becoming a great power. The second is, of course, he says that the reform process, economic reform, started late, much later than China. And third is that India did not earlier exercise its nuclear option. Another reputed person, one of the luminaries in Indian constellation of strategic thinking, Shiv Shankar Menon, Foreign Secretary, National Security Advisor with Menon. He's done an article for the Brookings recently. Menon is more realistic. He says foreign policy objectives should be transformation of India, growth, development, this, that. And then he goes on to say, some in India think that this is too defensive a goal, that it should make it clear that it wishes to be a great power or a superpower. Menon says, frankly, being a great power will follow, not precede, India's success in building a strong, prosperous, and modern country. And there is not much point being a great power with miserable people. Now, that's, he's from the Congress side, so he's put the knife, to the Modi supporters. The quest for Security Council permanent membership, the nuclear suppliers group, are well known, aspirations, albeit unsuccessful so far. Now, I think the previous speakers mentioned this thing about non-alignment and, alignment and India's fascination with this concept of strategic autonomy, which has been put to the test in the wake of the changes in the global environment. I think this question is, under Modi, being sort of more or less settled. Indian inclination for a multipolar world seems diminishing. They were the champions of multipolarity, Brazil, South Africa, India, etc. This multipolarity, at least it appears to me, is now, their interest is diminishing as China shoots to prominence and the world probably gets eventually reconciled with the China-US bipolarity. So therefore, it appears that Modi's India has joined the US camp to contain China. Taking sides in the global power play will bring to South Asia a Cold War type of divisions. We, Pakistan, have noted that the Chinese actions along the line of actual control and in Ladakh were significant, were appropriate and timely. China has given India a clear warning against committing strategic blunders. There are some people in India, very few unfortunately, because there is a very heavy clampdown on the Indian media and people are no longer able, in fact they were never able to, but even now, not able to express themselves. But there are Indians who are rational and who think that what Modi is doing is not good for India. They feel that India is in danger of being reduced to a mere agglomeration of narrowly conceived communities and closed minds, hostile to each other and stifling to their own lot. How Indians relate to one another influences how countries handle interstate relations. A shrinking vision at home cannot sustain an expansive vision abroad. I will just, in the context of Indian foreign policy, mention the model of Kautilya, Arthashastra. In their conduct, they are still very much guided by those principles given out by Kautilya and Gandhaki back in 3rd century BC. That's the art of governance, etc. I would like to conclude by saying that Modi's lasting gift to India will be the weakening of the Indian Union. India is more isolated today within the region than it ever was. Political polarization, economic collapse, social convulsions have knocked down the foundations of India's grandiose vision of itself in the world. And what are the lessons? I believe one is that India cannot graduate beyond South Asia unless it learns to respect its neighbors. And I'm confident that Pakistan will continue to hold India to an equation of equals.